Okay, hello, and welcome to Wednesday's class, Wednesday, September the 9th. I started and I ended last video recording talking about this article, but we didn't actually get to it on Tuesday, so we're going to start Wednesday's class with this. It's about fire. Now the unit is about Native America. It's about the way that the land was shaped by tribes who lived here long before colonists from Europe arrived. And one of the important ways that those Indian tribes shaped the land was through controlled fire. We like to think of fire as a destructive thing, but we also know that it can be really creative and be very helpful to a civilization of any kind. And so did early human tribes living here, the Native American tribes. So fire was used to control the landscape. And in clearing out all of the underbrush from a forest and destroying all of the dead leaves and the debris, the small shrubs, the little saplings, by clearing those all out, the land is actually made safer from wildfires. Wildfires happen when it lights up all of that detritus and that debris on the forest floor, and then also gets hot enough because of it to burn the trees themselves. And so for a long time, the tribes would control the land by clearing those forest floors and keeping them safe from out of control fires, conflagrations. Well, when the European colonists arrived, they were really fire averse and thought that this practice of setting fire to the land on purpose was a deliberate arson, was deliberately destructive, and didn't see the positive value in it. And so a lot of bans were set where tribes couldn't burn the land. Fast forward a few hundred years, and what we have are a lot of forests that have become so unmanaged. The wildfires that catch are really destructive. It's not the only reason that wildfires are destructive, but it's certainly not helping. And in response to this, in California, they're turning to some local tribes to try to help clear the land with fire. So there's an article that we want you all to read about this. Here are images from that article. Here's a fire creator, a firefighter, sure, but somebody who is there to create controlled fires, controlled burns. A couple more images of a fire creator with his torch. I love this because in the early parts of the article, this person will say, firing the land, burning the land is a kind of art. And that touches back beautifully to what we discussed yesterday, where art is just something that's got human hands on it, and the land being controlled by that human hand, even through the use of fire, is a cool example of artistic effort. More images, really gorgeous, clear cut images from this Guardian article. And here's the article. So one thing we'd like you to do is read through this article and ask yourself, is burning the land a kind of art? And then how does art help us survive? Does art help us survive? So questions to be thinking about that we'll come back to. That's step number 1 for class today, to read this article. You'll actually stop a little bit of the way in when you get to the image of the man with the walkie-talkie. This image on the right here. You can stop at that point because after that it's really interesting, but it's more of the same. Or you can keep reading if you're really into it. All right, that brings us to today's proper lesson, the one I thought we would start with, but it's all connected. We're going to talk about what was this land like before colonists, before Christopher Columbus claimed these West Indies below us in Central America as Spain's. Below, as if anything is below us, south of America. And one of those components that I wanted you to understand was the way that the land was controlled but looked uncontrolled to the European eye. And that's a really important theme throughout this course, is the way that Europeans came to America and didn't necessarily understand what they were seeing was civilized. It just looked so different from what they thought civilization was supposed to look like that they couldn't value it as equal to their own societies, but value it they should have, or it was valuable. And so we are going to just consider today, how did humans get here in the first place? Yes, Christopher Columbus comes over in 1492. Before that, you had Vikings coming to Greenland and the northern regions of North America. But what about the people that they encountered here? I'm going to lecture for a bit on where those people came from, we believe, and set the stage for the people that lived in this place before those European settlers arrived. So first, how did human beings get to North America? This is actually an unclear answer, and it's a source of great controversy. We're not totally sure. Scientists disagree, and there are entire fields of study where you could go find out what the answer to this question might be. You would study things like radiocarbon dating. You would do archaeology and digging to find fossils of artifacts from these civilizations. You would be a scientist of the land, trying to understand where exactly human communities first began to settle. But we know some things. Humans evolved and became the human species that we are today on the continent of Africa. And they began to leave Africa about 70 to 50,000 years ago. And notice how big of a gap that is. 20,000 years. That's how much we're still trying to understand this question. But we know that people, as we'll call them now, began to leave that birthplace and go out. They began migrating to the Americas about 20,000 years ago by crossing the Bering Strait, and then it seems traveling in boats down the Pacific coast. And this is a big change from when your parents were in school and from when I was in school, when I was your age. It was common wisdom that people came across the Bering Strait and then walked down North America and settled along the way in Canada, what is now Canada and North America, and down into Central and South America. But that would have put their earliest civilizations at about 13,000 years ago. That's what I learned. What's happened in the last couple of decades is scientists keep uncovering artifacts that are way older than 13,000 years ago, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how did this get here? And so now there's a pretty general consensus emerging that the boat theory explains how peoples traveled from that Alaska area and down pretty fast, faster than walking, to the west coast of America and then to South America. There's an article linked here if you're interested in learning more. And then there's this other theory that I just wanted to put in the article here, put in the slide. What about traveling by boat all the way from the Oceania area, which is Australia, New Zealand? And so if you imagine people walking out from Africa across Asia, couldn't they have taken a boat from Asia all the way over to North America? Here's a clip that I got from an article, the article I just linked, that I'll read out loud. Regarding sites in South America that date back more than 14,000 years, could humans have traveled there by boat, perhaps from Oceania? It's a question researchers have had to consider, but Rick, the expert in this article, says the theory doesn't pass the smell test because it's unlikely that people then were capable of crossing an open ocean. Still, he notes that scientists don't know much about prehistoric watercraft because they were made of perishable materials. That is, they just dissolved over time. We could say, haha, that idea doesn't work, but I can't tell you exactly why those early sites are there, he admits. Human ingenuity is incredible. I would never underestimate it. No, I love that. I love the mystery of that. We're not quite sure, but we know humans are capable of extraordinary things, and we need to keep an open mind about how human beings migrated to South America. Okay, so here's the Bering Strait that you might have learned about in other classes. I'm reviewing this, but it seems worthwhile. In the bottom left, you can see the window that this is a close-up of, with Russia on the left side of your screen and Alaska on the right side of your screen next to Canada. Long, long, long ago, this was actually a land bridge, and that's incontrovertible now. People believe that. It's not just a theory. So people could have walked across that strait through the land channel from Russia to Alaska, and then began the process of either walking or boating down the west coast of the Americas. Here's a little bit more about that migration. So you see on the left side, Africa, that origin of all these human population movements, and you see the arrows coming out from that place, both north to Europe and east to Asia, and then down south to Australia and the Pacific Islands, and then north again, northeast, over across that Bering Strait. One of my favorite things about this image are those arrows in the middle of the screen coming from like Australia, that area, Fiji Islands and the Philippines and all of the New Zealand. Those 3 arrows, they just kind of disappear. We don't exactly know what happens to them because we don't know. We're still learning so much. But then up towards the part of the screen where you can see America, you have these clear channels of human migration coming down into our nation. And that began those early human settlements in America. This is a wonderful video. I'm not going to put it on the, unfortunately, on the YouTube. I'm going to link up here because I'll get infringed for copyright. But go back and watch it in the slide to see the ways that human population grew over time. And you'll see this extraordinary explosion that happens in the human growth over time in general, but then especially in the Americas. So we go back to some of these images that I showed you yesterday. These are the Clovis points that I brought up and said, is this art? They are, like I mentioned yesterday, these very early relics of a human civilization that was in the Clovis settlement near Mexico, about 13,000 years old. And a piece of pottery that's mimicked off of an older piece, much older piece, that was found to be about 7,000 to 8,000 years old. So this is just from that same region. It's not exactly the same pot. And it's all indicative of these very early human civilizations that were flourishing in the regions of South and North America well before the advent of Europeans to this area. And that is the big takeaway from this mini lesson. It's that long before the colonists believed they were colonizing, and long before those settlers came, there were these really rich, complex civilizations already built in this area. Native Americans settled in this continent after early human migration some 15 to 20,000 years ago. They developed sophisticated cultures and art to reflect that culture. And in fact, we only know about these cultures because of those artifacts, those pieces of art. So here's the land we know well. This is the area of Virginia. Powhatan over to the far east there, that land is where the original Jamestown settlement took place. And so you're hearing in history classes maybe, or will hear about the initial settlement at Jamestown and how they dealt with the Powhatan tribe or the peoples of Chief Powhatan. Monacan Indians were living here in this area and still do live here in this area. Okay, so here's our individual work for the day. If you're in class, I'm going to assign you a region. If you're not in class, you can look over the entire nation, and I want you to find state names that have Native American origins in their name itself. It comes from a Native American language. What do those words mean? Take notes on what you found and be prepared to share that with me in your entry for today's class. To find out the state name origin, I have some suggestions for keywords that you can use in Google there. If you're in class, we'll talk about what you found. Why are we doing this? Well, the point is coming back to what we started with. These peoples lived here for a very long time, and they developed sophisticated cultures that reflected their values and the environment. Our American culture now, as we know it, has absorbed this into our mainstream language, even down to our state names, and used that etymology, that word biography of the Native American languages, even in places we don't realize it. So these histories are deep, and that's really what I want us to get out of this. For your BGD today, we're going to use what you learned. I want you to put the stem of what your state name is that you found, what it means, and you're going to write 3 sentences about it, each with a different middle word, a conjunction, so, because, or but. And so when I look on Wednesday's entry, I want to see 3 sentences about the state name that you found and these endings. For example, Missouri means this, so. Missouri means this, because. And Missouri means this, but. And then there's another big assignment. I want you to go on to Illuminate and take a quick test there. It's a reading test. It's just a pre-assessment to see where you are in your understanding of this kind of work. It should be an assignment listed for you. And you shouldn't have to do anything, but click on it take it and see how it goes. It's not graded. That's it.